Welcome to Gutted, weekly stories of reclaiming your instinct with me, your host, Allie Stark. In my work as a life coach, I've listened to countless clients talk about feeling stuck in their lives. Upon deeper investigation, the root cause of these feelings is almost always a betrayal of self. This podcast explores why we, as human beings, continue to ignore our gut instincts over and over again. I've invited people from all over the world to share stories of when they've lost touch with their intuition and how they found their way back home. This project is about vulnerability and learning from mistakes in order to empower each and every one of us to step more boldly into our true selves. Thanks so much for listening. This week, on episode 29 of Gutted, I interview Bill Protzman, a man on a mission to raise awareness of the power of music as a tool for self-care. Bill has been a musician for his entire life and shares how music has served as a tool for him to vibrantly express his feelings from a young age. In our conversation, Bill and I discuss thinking versus feeling and how to help bridge the gap and integrate the two as a way of reclaiming our humanness. Bill vulnerably shares the many roadblocks he has come across in his life and how the only way forward is by the path of the heart. On today's episode of Gutted, I am really thrilled to be welcoming Bill Protzman from San Diego, California. And Bill is a man on a quest to unlock the human spirit, no small feat. And he is also the author of one of Amazon's best sellers, More Than Human, The Value of Cultivating the Human Spirit in Your Organization Through Music Care. Bill, it's such a treat to have you on today's show. Thank you for being with me.
Allie, thank you for reaching out. It's a real thrill to contribute to this conversation. I already feel like the minority, because I'm looking at your podcast page and there's all these amazing women. I mean, let's face it, folks, these are amazing people. And I'm this, piano player with a story, right?
Oh, you're just a little minion with a story, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But doesn't it feel that way?
I hope it doesn't feel that way. I mean, I think, it's so funny how what we put and place attach meaning to, right? It's like these people that have told these stories, sure, some have done magnificent things, others have lived more normal lives. But to me, it's like everyone is extraordinary in the stories they have to share. So I don't look at you as a minion, and quite the opposite. I feel like you have a powerful story that's about to get unlocked. So I'm just appreciative of you being here.
Thank you, Allie. It's true. I feel the same way. I do a lot of volunteer work with homeless people, and there's no one more open than a homeless person who wants to change. And the stories that I hear are so beautiful. So you're absolutely correct. It's just about that conversation, right? The authentic conversation.
Well, and I think, I was with some friends this weekend and someone was asking me, this was someone who didn't know me very well. And he asked me if I was a curious person, which I sort of laughed. If you take me to a history museum, my curiosity about, what happened in the 1920s wanes unless I have a personal story to attach it to. And I think that that's the case with anything for me, is if I can feel the heart. And I think that what you and I are going to talk about today is the path of the heart. Then I'm innately curious in what there is to be said.
Yeah, I have to agree with you. As you're talking, I'm thinking that you're creating a podcast that's sort of an archive of where we were, early in the 21st century. Just the way that, some of the Holocaust survivors who wrote books about Elie Wiesel and who wrote about that experience, or who were composing in that experience and left us music that we can hear and play, inform us of what it was like to be them then. Just like we're documenting that, for future generations here.
Wow. Thank you for saying that. If I think about it, because I started this podcast last May, I will say 2017 has been a year of death, a lot of death for me, death of human beings that I love, death of relationships, death of homes that I've lived in. And I didn't even really think about it till you said it, but I've been documenting through my conversations, because I obviously bring what's going on for me up. I've really been documenting that process for me, which is at some point I think will be interesting to look back on. Right now, it's a little too close to home.
Yes, I know. And that's what growing up is all about, right? We get perspective on what happened when we were younger. And it really hits. I mean, so I'm 56 years old, full disclosure. And I don't know that I had a midlife crisis, but what I've had are all these little aha moments where I look back and sometimes it'll be something global like, oh, everything that's happened in my life has combined to make this moment right now possible. And sometimes it'll be, oh, well, now it makes sense why I learned how to do that weird task that I learned because now I need it. So sometimes it's big momentous and other times it's just, well, that makes perfect sense now, right?
Yeah.
But believe me, they get more and more precious and more frequent. And it's really wonderful to roll down the road, right, to being a seasoned citizen. It's cool in a way.
I love that, a seasoned citizen. I was speaking, I don't know if it was my last interview. I think it was my last interview. I was talking about how life is so precious, but I'm interested in how we can live in a way where we're not so precious about it.
Oh, yeah, we can't tiptoe around through this whole thing, right?
Yes.
There's that marvelous story of Lancelot who's going to rescue his love, Guinevere, and he has to walk across a sword that's edge up in bare feet over this chasm, that's hundreds of feet deep. And it's like that, right? You have to go fully.
It's like that's like what Tony Robbins makes people do in his big workshop. Exactly.
Yeah. You have to go fully. Otherwise, why go?
Otherwise, why go? So, Bill, you have been a musician for your entire life. You said that you started playing piano when you were 3 years old, and you even said that playing piano has saved your life.
Yes.
And I know that our conversation, based on what we chatted about, has both the opportunity and possibility of being quite tangential, although I know we're eventually going to be getting somewhere, wherever that may be. So I'm going to give kind of two spaces where I'd like to dig a little bit more, is you sharing your initial relationship with music. And then I also know that sharing the experience of marrying your first wife is going to set us a little bit on the course and path of the meat that we're going to discuss.
Right. So I can do this quickly. So, Ali, when you're a musician, here's the deal. You can play the notes and you can be very convincing, but it's better if you feel what's actually happening behind the notes. The composer who isn't with us anymore has had to write this stuff down, and we have to look at the notes and try to interpret the emotions that he wanted to convey. And sometimes it's easy and sometimes it's not. But the point is that you have to be fully invested in that to the point of feeling those emotions as fully as you can in your own body to bring them out in your hands, in my case at the piano, to an audience who may or may not get them, right? So it's an all or nothing thing. It's that firewalk. You have to come with all of that ready to go. Now, that's not something you get overnight. As a 6-year-old, I could see that there was an effect when people heard music. But as a 56-year-old, I know a lot more about that. And I also have a deeper internal soundboard to feel the feelings.
What a sweet description.
I've come a long ways, but imagine that same poor little kid now with the ability to feel things at the piano, growing up in a typical patriarchal home where the emotional bandwidth is very narrow. What's acceptable and what's not is a very limited amount of space. Very loving family, nothing abusive going on. But when my job, if you will, or avocation is finding and expressing feelings fully, and I'm at the keyboard, I'm cool. But the rest of the time as a kid, I'm like in a little box. I can't do much more than just be in that box. So I got really good at feeling feelings at the keyboard, and really bad at everything else, even talking about it. I couldn't talk about it. I had no language, right? Beethoven, no problem. But when it came to expressing like anger, I couldn't say, I'm angry. It wasn't in my vocabulary. So take that, roll it forward a little ways, and now I'm trying to decide to get married. And I did. And I made this choice based on the checklist, right?
What was on your checklist?
Do we love each other? Check, right? Well, that's kind of a big area. You might, I'd break that down a little more, right? Right?
Well, and actually, Bill, I don't want to interrupt you as you go into the marriage story, but I was just thinking, because Tom Petty passed away last week, and it had a really big impact on me. And Tom Petty was, a musician that was played in my house growing. Tom Petty makes me think of the sweetest, softest parts of my father. It just hits me on a heart level. And so I went deep into Tom Petty, deep last week. And I rewatched his documentary. And to what you were saying is I was observing this man where it was like he didn't have a choice but to make music. Like music came through him. And the more that you learned, it was like, he came from an abusive family. There was a lot of trauma, and it was inherently the way that he was able to express and feel. And I think that it's also because of that significance what had him keep both of his feet on the ground, because he was so humble and grounded amidst all of his fame. And so anyway, I was as you were talking about that, I was really kind of thinking about how powerful that was for me.
I agree with you, because we hear about so many amazing musicians, and it's like their bandwidth for trauma, pain, whatever, they have this enormous bandwidth that they can channel into their art. And even if it's not music, I mean, Van Gogh, right, killed himself. So there's this incredible power that exists in creative people that a lot of us would look at and go, well, that's not normal. I mean, look at crazy Beethoven, right? Abusive, deaf, impossible to get along with. And he's writing these fantastic symphonies. One of the great sadnesses in my life is not knowing more fully the whole story of Kurt Cobain and how he came to take his life. But there's a man who was containing amazing emotion and was able to get a lot of it out. Sometimes it's so big that it just takes you.
Yeah.
And sometimes you're able to live with it and sustain an entire career around that, right? So I'm in utter awe of those guys, and oh my gosh, women too. Think about the women who we've lost recently.
I know. I was just Amy Winehouse was who was coming up for me, and just when you hear someone's soul in their voice,
isn't it the truth?
Yeah. Well, and kind of the duality is like, I didn't know her, but we can say she was, a troubled person. But I think also there's this whole part about now the society that we live in, which is so obsessed with fame and celebrity and knowing all the little bits and details of someone's life, is that we actually rip people apart. I think we dismember them so that their ability to connect with that soul space and really ground and choose the path with heart almost becomes impossible.
Yeah, it must be very, very difficult. I mean, in my limited experience, it's difficult. So when I see someone who's done it for their entire lifetime and is still doing it because it's all that they can do, right? That's just in you. You have to do it.
Yes.
My hat goes off. We got to see Dr. John. This is a way off tangential thing.
Don't worry, I'm tracking. We're going to go back to the wedding.
It's what was his famous Iko? Anyway, he's this New Orleans style piano player and rock and roll kind of singer, Leon Russell-ish style, but slightly more. So we got to see him on stage not long ago. And this is a guy who I think the only walking that he does on his own is on and off the stage. He's very frail. But he got up there, and in spite of all of his physical limitations, he had everybody in this entire amphitheater just right with him. And when he got up and bowed and shook hands with a couple of people in the front row and left the stage, I just had this sense that we'd been treated to a very special presence.
Mm.
It wasn't so much the music, it was the presence of this guy who's got 60 years or more of mileage, maybe 70 years. I don't know. He's been playing a long time. And that was the thing. That was what he brought. He didn't bring brilliant piano playing or brilliant singing or any of that. He brought the presence and the depth of his years of doing that to everyone who was there that night, and it spoke.
It's so true. I can use that to circle us back, because what you were talking about was, you were talking more or less about the masculine and the feminine, and how music was an expression for you growing up to actually channel your emotions, and then how you did not have that skill set built outside of music. So in relationship, via work, through school, whatever it may be.
You can imagine that, how this kid who's sort of a patriarchal, straight white guy in business and something completely different at the piano.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And then you find yourself getting ready to get married.
Yes.
And here we are again.
And you asked that wonderful question, what was on your list, right?
Yes.
So consider that as a 20-something, the list wouldn't have had those deep qualities that I could now bring to it. But it was a pretty good list, and the pluses outweighed the minuses, right? So we put this whole thing together, and it was like this whirlwind of things were just happening, and it was all lined up. We had this beautiful garden wedding planned in the spring with all these flowers and whatever. all the people invited, everybody shows up. And about 10 minutes before the ceremony was to start, I kid you not, it hailed. Like the size of peas. Hail that you don't see in Southern California fell from the sky over our beautiful garden wedding. All the guests are running to get, far away. My best man turns to me, he says, Bill, God's honest truth. He says, Bill, you sure you want to go through with this? And I'm dogged on my list, right? The pluses had outweighed the minuses. So this was the right thing to do. So we wait and the weather clears and people are starting to walk in. My soon-to-be mother-in-law comes by and she says, she says, meeting my almost wife is a real handful, like that, right?
Wow.
And I'm still on the path, right? So in spite of it all, we got married, had two wonderful kids, and wound up discovering 6 or 7 years later that we were completely incompatible. And that through no fault of our own, we'd wandered into this thing and gotten stuck there, right? And for me, I was still learning the emotional stuff. So that feeling of helplessness, hey, I made all the right choices. They told me I was supposed to do this. I did all the right things, right? And here I am now, right? Here I am now. So I honestly felt like killing myself. I said, this is crazy. My family would be better off if, they had the insurance money. That was the level of consciousness I was at.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm going to skip a whole lot of time now because after that divorce, I learned that my paternal father had taken his own life over a business deal. I didn't know this. And I've since learned that things like that suicidal ideation that I live with every day of my life sort of can run genetically unless they're cleansed or purged with intention. And I was perhaps maybe the third or more in line of this genetic predisposition to sort of follow all the rules, and when it doesn't work, just cash in. Right? That was the nature of my, I don't even want to call it intuition. What would you call that? The opposite of intuition.
Well, I don't actually think, what you're talking about is a area or a subject that I find incredibly fascinating, which is around intergeneration, how things live intergenerationally. And I think that there's not a word for it because I don't think that how we measure science, right? Because we tend to all want quantitative answer-based information, is you're talking about topics that can't be measured by old tools, right? By these quantitative science-based tools. But I think that there's such, to me, this is a topic that speaks very deeply, which is really about lineage of trauma, intergenerations of trauma, being put on, I think each new generation is gifted. I think the way I look at it is kind of gifted the opportunity to open Pandora's box and say, what can I attempt to heal here so it doesn't get passed on? But the rest of the world is sort of looking at you like you're crazy because there's nothing that we've ever figured out to actually measure this.
Yes, that's true. And I subscribe to that as well, being someone who learns best the hard way. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I learned a lot from doing my first marriage the hard way. But it seems that if you're a feeling person rather than a thinking person, the feeling people seem to be able to steer around a lot of the roadblocks that we thinkers get bumped up against or try to bash through. Is that fair? I mean, it's only my experience. I'm not trying to generalize this out, but I've found intuition is a much easier way in my own life now.
Well, I guess my question, I would put a question back on you. Do you feel like you have shifted from a thinker into more of a feeler? Do you think that was a space, not saying that the feelings weren't always there, because obviously they were when you were 3, 4, 5 playing the piano, but it sounds like there was quite a construct of training that had to happen to really let yourself go there, which if we want to talk about white male patriarchy, that would make sense to me.
Yeah, and that's true because the white male isn't necessarily taught to emote well.
Right.
I've had piles of therapy throughout the years, and the first thing that my very first therapist did with me was start to give me a language that I could use to explain what was going on when I was playing these amazing emotions at the piano in real English, right? So I could talk about it. So I had to start to rebuild that. But you're asking about this sort of this disconnect. For me, I've watched my Myers-Briggs change over the years, right? And that basically means that you watch the shift in the way that you think and the way that you feel. And those two things are sort of coming closer together for me. I don't spend so much time traversing this empty space between them. And I think, isn't that the whole object of life anyway, is to
Yes.
integrate those things, what we used to call the masculine qualities and feminine qualities. I think that's a good metaphor, perhaps, but to integrate those in a way so that they're human qualities. And we sort of reclaim the humanness of being gentle, or the humanness of being authentic. In business, we hear about the need to be vulnerable. I think that's part of that's the right direction, right? And how gratitude is a powerful force. That's the right direction. It's not leaving aside your thinking. It's, if you're me, it's integrating into that thinking these more intuitive, expressive qualities that you can practice and get better at.
There's just something that kind of popped into my brain. And because I always get nervous when I verbally broadcast something that I haven't thought through at all. But I was thinking a little bit about, and I have no idea what this experience is like, but in observation of someone who is transgender or trying to figure out how they identify sexually, which I think is also a big questioning of like, where do I lie, not just on the sexual spectrum, but on the masculine feminine spectrum. As we're talking about this, I'm like, they've got something figured out that I think so few of us do have, which is like, it's somewhere just in the middle.
Yeah, yeah. And not one dot, but some spectrum.
It's moving constantly. It's a moving
Yeah, it's
target.
always happening. I'm so grateful for the gay male friends that I had after my first divorce, because they helped me to understand it was okay to be me. And what that means is I don't have a gay sexual identity. I have for one of better reason, a feminine side that has qualities in it that are important, that are essential, that I can't live without. I cannot go to the piano without those qualities and be convincing. It won't happen. It just won't happen. But the men that I knew back then were able to show me that how to be with those qualities in a way that integrated them instead of made me flip one way or the other in terms of sexual preference or gender orientation. So yes, thankfully this is all happening like in a broader sense in the world today. And we're getting less stigmatized around things that we can be more humanized with.
I almost want to say yes, and it's like there's such a veil. The veil is being removed, but I think that we are seeing both the broadening of people's hearts, and then there's so much fear that's being released. I think it's just like this sea of fear from so many different places, because to go into an idea that you and I were talking about, I think that the fear stems from like, is this a yes or is this a no? Is this black or is this white? And I think that the reality is it's neither. It's a million shades of gray.
Yeah.
And how do we live in that shade of gray, which is really, how do we take the path of the heart?
Yes. And allow for 7.5 billion different paths.
I love that. Yes, 7.5 unique paths of heart.
So I work in an environment where I volunteer alongside a lot of clinicians, and clinicians have very specific rules for how things should be, right? We know that aspirin is good for headaches, so we prescribe aspirin. Well, not all those rules work when you get into the creative arts. So music therapy, which is an incredible field of one-on-one therapeutic relationships that are facilitated by music, is struggling with that because there are 7.5 billion different ways of hearing music, right? So being able to say, what's the best song for happiness? There's no answer to that because there are 7.5 billion best songs for happiness, and being able to look at a person and see them as more than just someone with a particular symptom that needs a particular intervention. That's where we have to go with this. And sadly, our Western perception of folks who don't quite fit the mold is to try to find some diagnosis, right? Oh, a transgender person must be XYZ. Bless their hearts, there's still people out there trying to pray away the gay. And it's like, okay, but that isn't where the world is anymore. The world is looking and saying, look at the amazing variety that exists in the world right now. What can we do with that? What can we do with that? So the fearful side of it, which is still stuck in a binary idea of gender or whatever it is that keeps you in a place, maybe over-reliance on a belief system that isn't working, but it's all you've got, or some militant, like, oh, bless my friends who eat nothing but vegetables, but militant vegans just really twist me, right? Right? We've been there, right? It's like people, you're being exactly the way that you
preach to not be.
Yeah, you're preaching to exactly right. And it's like you want to say, I love it that you eat vegetables, dude. That's so cool. But don't make me wrong for having a steak, right? And that I think that fear it's how we see that, right?
Yeah.
And we can fix it, but as human beings, we also need to learn by experience and evolution. And we're evolving. Someone said, I think the things are evolving so fast that we as humans can't keep up. Our evolutionary pace doesn't really match, the way that the world is changing. At the end of the day, Mother Nature wins. The giant volcano under Yellowstone blows up or whatever, and dial back to 10,000 beings again, like we were shortly after the last ice age, and we start repopulating the earth. But we learn from that stuff, bit by bit, right? I've learned somehow.
I think we have to. Well, I'm going to bring it back to kind of post your marriage for a moment here, but I think sometimes you will have life experiences. This is for me where when I'm in it, I'm like, whoa, I can feel myself growing right now. Do my clothes still fit? Like I'm stretching, I'm really expanding. And then other times it's so much more subtle. And I experience this with clients all of the time where they're like, but nothing's happening. I'm not doing anything.
Yeah. When is this going to change?
Right. I have all this awareness. Why isn't the action happening? And I'm like, you're in it. This is it. This is the moment. This is it right now. Like what you're experiencing right now is the shift and the change, and it's subtle. It's like tectonic plates before an earthquake. Like it's just these subtle moves and shifts, and it's just that we all need to just shut up a little bit to actually feel them.
That's the key, isn't it? Just slowing down, taking time. The podcast is a great medium because people have to listen to it, right?
I hope so.
Well, we hope so, right? It's not just a soundbite medium, right? I watch people go to the museum all the time and look at art. And as you're looking at art, some people actually stop walking and look at art. And then they walk again and they look. And some people are just in trance and they're sitting there staring at some piece. And if you know how to look at art, that must be an amazing experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like listening to music. You can put Tom Petty in the headphones and sit in the chair, and it's transcendental. If that's your thing, you're gone.
You're gone. You're so fully in it. Yes.
It's a meditation. Do we need that? Do we need to be able to turn off our minds and stop the monologue and just put our feet in the sand and let the music go, or whatever it is that transports us? So podcasting, I think, does that in a way, helps people slow down and listen, which is important.
So, Bill, you had this experience where I would say the earth was speaking to you a little bit. It was giving you signs of maybe this wasn't the best marriage. You then go through with some of the marriage, you get divorced from the marriage. And then what happened? Because I know that there were some things that unfolded after that period of time.
Well, being the, patriarchal white male, I tried again and made another marriage, during the course of which I had the opportunity to win a very long and expensive custody battle, and my daughter came to live with me full time, which pretty much sacrificed the second marriage and the house and everything else, because the patriarchal bill said this is the right thing to do to protect my daughter, right? So I did that, and that marriage unwound too. But my daughter went off to college, and my son was in college, and everything was cool. And all of a sudden, on Labor Day weekend of 2007, yes, 10 years ago, I was sitting there in my empty house, beginning to feel very sorry for myself. Like, okay, 2 marriages, 2 divorces, 2 bankruptcies, lost the house, my kids are gone. What have I done here? And at those moments, so I'm a chronically depressed person. So at those moments, things can get overwhelming very quickly. And that night, it got to the point of just feeling like there was no reason to live. And I'd been doing a lot of work with music up to that point. So I took my own medicine. Instead of going out and finding a bridge, I put on the headphones and I sat down in a chair and started listening to a piece of music that's very meaningful to me over and over and over again. And as I've learned to do, I let the darkest feelings that I could find come up to the surface of expression. Not at the keyboard, just Bill sitting there in the chair with his music. I don't know how long it took, but eventually I woke up and went to bed. And something had changed, something had shifted. I realized the next morning that I'd made a choice to keep breathing and that's what I wanted. I'd been going back and forth on that choice for a long time, and I still make that choice to keep breathing. It's a lot easier than it was. But the other thing that hit me that morning was words. And I started writing down these words, and I realized about an hour into it that I was writing lyrics. And pretty soon there were no more, and it was finished. And so I've got to make music for this. So I went to the piano, and by half the day had gone, there was a song that had come from that whole thing. It's not much of a song. I performed it a couple of times, and I don't sing, so you can imagine the courage it takes to be able to do this. But that whole process of the music, what I've called the suicide music, leading to the song that spontaneously just came when there was room for it to appear, makes very powerful theater. So I've used it a couple of times. It's cathartic to re-experience that. It's cathartic to talk about it. And it took me about 8 years before I could even explain the experience in terms that were understandable. But it was a choice. It was a choice to reaffirm myself and put a flag in the ground and say, no, this is my life. And as messed up as it is, this is where I am, and this is the way forward. And so 10 years later, it has been the way forward. The most amazing things have happened to my daughter. She's now a chaplain. I'm so glad that she had the experiences that she did, even though they were terrible, that resulted in her heart for the LGBTQ community, and the fact that she is now married to the love of her life. And the two of them are the most amazing gay women I have ever seen in my life. Is just the work these people do it blows me away. It blows me away to watch what's happened as a result of what looked like a tragedy.
I'm just feeling really, really deeply, deeply touched about what you just shared.
It's a lot in a short space. I can appreciate that.
Yeah, I was just feeling a moment of just wanting to pause the space and hold the depths of, I think, even just the admittance or honoring, I am someone who has lived on and off with chronic depression, because I know that many people listening to that can relate. And there is so few opportunities, I think, to state that and not feel like in my experience listening to that, there's no part of me that's like, I need to fix you or you're broken. It's just like, yeah, that's been part of your path. Okay.
And by the way, if anybody out there is chronically depressed, do a hashtag me too. The straight white male raised in a patriarchal family doesn't have much of an outlet for depression. We're sort of taught to keep that in, to hold it all in and, keep a stiff upper lip and all of that. But when you meet people who have been beaten by that, combat veterans, folks who've been living on the street, they come out of that with an openness and authenticity and an ability to lead, I think, that lets people like me say, yeah, I can follow him. I understand being blown up and having post-traumatic stress is awful, but I want to watch where you're going and I want to follow you because you're going to help lead me out of my thing, this little chronic depression thing that I have, which isn't half as bad as not having legs or whatever, So this great tragedy of the fear that you're talking about, out of that fear are coming leaders, and they're coming examples, and they're coming quiet places where people like in this podcast can check in and feel like they're not alone.
Thank you for saying that. I'm, how do I want to share this? There are parts of me, because of a lot of recent transition of leaving a relationship, of being pretty ungrounded for a period of time, of just this past weekend moving in with a dear friend of mine, where I am really starting to clearly see a couple of sides of myself. One is, I think I always knew this, but I'm putting words to it. So, and I'm going to shift it. So I think I can sometimes be a little bit bossy, which I think is a very female judgmental word. So I'm just going to say it as, sometimes I like to be the boss, because if it was said for a man, that's how it would be said. But I'm also just been observing the parts of me that run really anxious and becoming rather than judgmental of them, really soft to like, oh, yeah, you get anxious when you're not given enough information. You get anxious when you aren't sure how someone feels about you and you have feelings towards them, platonic or not platonic. And I think there's this stepping into this space of like, sure, they may be shadowed sides of myself, but I can also embrace them lovingly and share them openly. And I think that that's the way that they start to shift and move and transform. But we have to be given a safe space to do that.
Yeah. And don't believe the patriarchy that says that you have to paper that over and act a different way, because the patriarchy, let's face it, is wrong. Look at where it's gotten us. Here we are, what, 1,200 years of the patriarchy, and things are not great, right? So we can't ignore the feminine anymore. And I'm not meaning that we ignore women. We're talking about the spiritual qualities that were sort of written out of our belief system 1,300 years ago, or maybe longer. We need those, right? We need the vulnerability and the insight that comes from an open heart. And unless you're Tony Robbins, there's not many guys that are out there that are that good at it right now.
Yeah.
We need strong women, and I mean strong in the sense of authentic, expressive, completely connected women who can say, you know what, patriarchy, it's not going to work if you keep doing it that way.
Well, and Bill, my question or curiosity that's coming up is, I'm hearing you, if I read between the lines, I don't know if this is the right word, but there's sort of that embarrassment or guilt or shame for being a white male and then without choice being a part of that system. And my question is, it's like so obvious as I'm speaking to you, you're deeply sensitive and you pay attention to your intuition and you're committed to self-growth and you use music for healing. And, there's all these ways that you have taken those privileges and are really turning them into opportunities. And my question is, we need men like you. And so how can you hold the space of who you are and let go of the guilt or the shame around it? And please correct me if I'm overstepping and that's not actually your, reality.
No, I think the media in particular wants straight white males to feel pretty bad right now. I don't know what's served by that other than selling advertising space, but there are things that in my family history, as you mentioned, that I'm not proud of. I've actually done trauma work to let some of that generational stuff go, or that intergenerational stuff go. Our family is part of the American Revolution. If you go back far enough, we're also part of the Civil War, and we're on both sides of the Civil War. That's a tough one, right? Mm-hmm. That's a really tough one to live that through. I don't believe that any of us were ever wealthy to the point of being able to like own slaves or any of that. But when we're looking at our cultural sort of burden right now, there's so much to not be too proud of. We were sitting around the dining room table the other day, and one of the girls who's studying American history said, what have white men really done for America? And okay, so you're in what? High school. This is where you're asking these questions, right? So what have white men done for America? Well, there's two sides to that question, right? There's the shame side that says, that's where we were and we did these terrible things. And we probably shouldn't have taken all the Native American land, and we probably shouldn't have had slaves. And if we look back on it now, we would have done it differently. Well, duh, right? That's what humans do. But what is our way of letting go of that shame and letting go of that guilt? Because it's there. It's there for me. I know it's there for other people too. Mm-hmm. And it exists not so much as a masculine feminine thing. I think, Ali, it's a human thing. We all feel this. My middle stepdaughters just had a baby, who's the most amazing thing. And so the baby's heritage is Native American, among other things. And the family who is supporting this incredible little child, our in-laws, are very much in their tradition of the beauty of being a Native American in the modern world. It's got to be fraught with all kinds of things, but the core of that tradition is one of healing and great welcoming, and there's music, and it's a beautiful thing that got sort of run off our land in America. Why did that have to happen? I don't know. So it can come back now. I don't have time to feel shame about that. it is there in our past, but in my present is a different experience. In my present is a different experience of being able to be in touch with in a very direct and intimate and family connected way with the Native American culture that my ancestors probably helped, drive off the land. That's the paradox. And all I can do is integrate, right? I can't ignore the one. I have to acknowledge that it happened. But the paradox is we can make a different choice, right? We can choose something different.
And I think that we can hold the awareness without embodying the shame or guilt. A book that I really love is called A Soul Without Shame. Because, to me, it's like shame and guilt are like very outermost layers of inner feelings, which the inner feelings I think are oftentimes grief or sadness or disappointment or anger. And so I think it's like, how can we hold the awareness and not necessarily let ourselves be taken? Can you own it? And can you also not let it own you? I think that's what I'm trying to say.
Yes, and I think we must. There are lessons in shame. There are lessons in guilt. And those lessons are ones that you won't have unless you're willing to fully feel that. And, there's nothing wrong with sitting down and fully feeling joy, right? We all like that. But sitting down to fully feel guilt, it's more difficult.
Yeah.
But letting that come up and be fully experienced in me in some way is probably my way forward on guilt. I did that with suicide, right? So I ought to be able to do it with guilt or worthlessness or whatever. But,
yeah.
And I've learned to not be afraid of that. It's still scary, but I know that when I sit down with fear or with anger, it's going to progress. I'll finish the song, right? And the feeling will have been fully expressed. Or if not, I'll play it again. But we have to turn off a lot of other noise first to do that. Because once you've experienced the choice of, I want to breathe, every day when you answer the question about, is this the day I'll continue to breathe? It's much easier once you've put that, flag in the sand. But you have to go to that deep place to answer that question fully. You just can't keep papering it over. And I think it's probably the same with guilt and shame. I mean, that's my current thing right now is how do I live in this place of being sort of the unintended object of so much that's wrong with our society. It's a difficult understanding.
Yeah, I'm it's sort of sweet. We're sort of at the end of our time together, and I feel really drawn to leave this interview with that being an open inquiry. And for the audience, if you are listening to this, and I know many people, you listen and it's on your way to work or in a car or whatever it may be, I really invite that on this episode, I've never asked for this before, but if you have a way that you want to engage on this question, whether it be via social media or through the website, I think it would be a conversation that both Bill and I would be really open to engaging with as well.
I think we must. I think we have to have this conversation.
Bill, I want to say, pretty floored. You reached out to me after listening to Diana Bonney's interview, and I didn't really know what to expect. And I'm just feeling humbled and inspired and deeply touched by what you have chosen to share with me today. And thank you for trusting me to share like this.
Thank you, Ali. It's an honor.
And if you would like to learn more about Bill, you can find him many different ways. He has two websites, his personal website, which is billprotzmann.com. That's www.billprotzmann.com. musiccare.net. That's musiccare.net. And through Twitter under Bill Protzmann, and also Facebook under his name as well. Finally, make sure to check out Bill's book, More Than Human, The Value of Cultivating the Human Spirit in Your Organization, which you can find through Amazon. Bill, thank you so much for being with me here today on this week's episode of Gutted.
Thank you, Ali.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Gutted with your host, Ali Stark. To learn more about this podcast and be kept up to date with our latest interviews, visit our website, www.gutted, stories, stories.com, or you can find us on Instagram at gutted_stories. See you next week for new insights on how to reclaim your instinct.